You are listening to the Worlding Podcast, where we explore the relationship of how we are both shaping and being shaped by our surroundings. The podcast traces interconnections by inviting each episode's guest to pass on the mic to someone who has influenced their world. And now, here's your host, dance artist Renae Shadler.
Hello friends. Today we continue our 11th string figure with my guest, Daniel Hengst, a media artist whose projects often centre non-human subjects and deal with the potential of digital technologies to encourage social change. Thanks so much for chatting with us today.
Hi, Renae. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really happy to be a part and to be a guest here. And I'm really thankful also for Ollie, who invited me or who proposed me to the second part of this 11th string figure.
To start the conversation, can you tell myself and listeners a little bit about your current surroundings and how they are worlding you, so shaping you in this very moment?
Yeah, actually, I'm in Essen, which is more or less the second city I live in. First one is Berlin, and so I'm moving between these cities sometimes. And I think Essen is really even more than Berlin, a very car-centric city. You have only a little green in the city, little areas that look in a way natural or where flowers could grow or trees could stand. So this is I'm always occupied with these different surroundings that we humans create. And it always shapes also my mode of working, the time that I'm spending in the city, in the flat, outside of the flat. And actually, currently I'm sitting in front of my computer. So I'm sitting at my desk. There's a little plant also on the desk. A lot of things are laying around, a bit chaotic, but this is, I guess, normal for myself and for the mode I'm working in.
So I know you're very interested in surroundings because I had the pleasure of recently seeing your solo exhibition at Haunt Berlin and experienced your virtual reality artwork, Blooming Love, which explored the simulated peatlands of Latvia. Can you share with listeners who may not be familiar with peat what this substance is, this material as you refer to it?
Yes, sure. This is, it's actually something I also stumbled across only some years ago, because when I went the first time with my dear colleague and friend Beck Berger to Latvia, it was amazing, and I was surprised how little I would know about peatlands and about what peat is. Peat is actually a material consisting out of halfly or non-decomposed material, plant material most of the time, that is not decomposing, meaning the CO2 that is stored throughout the life of a plant will not be going again into the atmosphere. So it will stay in the material, and thereby it will stay underground. It will be stored in the earth. And that's why it's also very important for tackling and fighting climate change, that peatlands should still exist, and that we as humans should take care of peatlands. So that the peat could grow and grow and grow, instead of taking the peat out. For example, peat is used for medicine, and also for alcoholic industries, but the most of the time peat is used for gardening. So it's about, sometimes you go to a shop and you can buy peat for your balcony, soil for your balcony, and this is enriched with peat. And these things you should think about twice, because it's this peat that is coming from these peatlands, meaning this peat needs to be harvested from these areas, and thereby the peatlands are destroyed.
When I was experiencing Blooming Love, I was there with my partner and his 70-year-old mother, 70 plus, I might add. And for us, it was so exciting to put on these VR goggles and be transported to the peatlands, and especially the ability to experience different levels of the ecosystem, which would not have been available to us otherwise. So with my partner's mum, it was very exciting for her to bend her knees, for example, and look below the soil line. Can you share a little bit that process of finding that information and creating really this closeness between visitors to the exhibition and the peatlands, which many of us haven't experienced in real life?
I'm feeling very happy and to hear this, that you had this experience and how you described the experience. When I started to create the artwork, I was really interested in intimacy between plant and humans. So I was asking myself the question, is there an intimacy already that I maybe not experience so much throughout my daily life? And if so, how can this intimacy be brought to visibility, to sensibility, through a different medium, like in this case, VR, virtual reality. And so I started to create this idea of a plant or a greenhouse for human-plants relationships, where people could enter and where not plants are growing, but where relations and emotions towards plants could grow. And so I wanted to bring plants and humans on eye level towards each other, meaning that you have to make the human always smaller, because in the reality, humans are overarching everything. They are exploring every part of the world, inducing change all over the planet. And so I wanted to make the human smaller, make it more embedded into this peatland. And so that's why you are finding yourself on a very little or you will find yourself on the perspective of an insect or a little animal that is traveling through the peatlands.
What really struck me also with the artwork was that I wasn't able to change, as you're talking about this kind of impulse to change or manipulate or transform, because I didn't have that function within the VR. I wasn't able to mow the lawn, or really I could get close to plants and I could zoom in on plants, but I couldn't break off a leaf or something like this. Obviously, that was a very active part of your creation of the work and an active choice. How did that come about also in terms of creating this level playing field?
It's also going back to the first encounters I made with peatlands in Latvia. So we met a scientist there, Agnese Priede, and she told us about the way how peatlands would be restored after the mining that took place throughout the Soviet occupation of Latvia. And so it was a moment where she said, actually, the best thing you could do to restore peatlands is to leave them alone. And I think this is also, you can think about a lot of different biomes, a lot of different nature areas where the same would fit, the same sentence could fit. If we would leave this nature, the nature would restore itself without our need to support it, and so on and so on. So that was one of the major starting points for me to trying to think about how to get rid, let's say, of a kind of a human activeness, a human interaction into this virtual lens, into the representation of a real nature, and how to create a kind of an experience space where you would experience what it would be to be reduced to your mere gaze, so that you are not an active or an acting subject anymore, but you are only a kind of only, I mean it in quotes, you are a passive desirer, right? You're a person that is looking at it through these technologies maybe, or through a kind of an absence You are creating a proximity in an absence, and thereby creating a desire or having a desire to not entering these natural areas anymore, because this is the most loving thing we could do for this nature, to leave it alone, actually. And this was one also of these ideas or thoughts I had while making these artworks, and thereby I was also going away more and more about what it would mean to also include my own artistic practice, my handwriting of something that I did. And so I took myself also more and more away and made the plants more and more realistic. You know what I mean?
Totally. It also reminds me of a time in 2017. I went for a walk in Peatlands in Finland. I was with an environmental researcher, and we came back from the walk, and she said very casually, your footprints will be embedded in the landscape for 6 years.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
And it was really, for me, such a deep learning about impact, actually.
Mm-hmm.
And the walk had really filled me up with lots of impressions. So I really appreciate that you're also allowing this observer role to be there, because I remember the smells very acutely. I remember it was quite foggy, like very typical kind of November Finland weather. Mm-hmm. But the sadness or this feeling of guilt, knowing that these steps now are imprinted in the peat for 6 years was, it's heavy also. So I think in that way, using your creativity to create this intimacy or form these moments of exchange is really potent, especially in this moment.
I really like how you depict it or how you remember this moment. But I think also we should not underestimate this term of interacting into nature, because it's something, as you said, like having a hike, having a walk, and these footsteps are inscribed 6 years. This is already a lot of things. But then if you think on the scale that is really the problem for interacting with nature, meaning big machines harvesting peat, or the drainage of peatlands, like that, so that the water is like being taken out of the soil. These are like the big steps. This is what I would think of most of the time while creating this. This is the activity that needs to be stopped, or that needs to be at least questioned, why we are doing this and how we are doing it. So I think the hike and this personal approach of interacting or approaching a landscape is one thing, but I think the more crucial and the more important part is these bigger scale things that happen.
Yeah, absolutely. But then at the same time, the personal is political. And at the moment, I am not in companionship with these big machines. However, I do use soil on my balcony. So this is definitely a way of being part of that conversation, and perhaps thinking next spring of a different flowering soil, or something from the market that could be an alternative. I want to dive a little bit more into the actual VR itself, Daniel, because I recently was part of a panel for the opening of Free the Air, an Aeroscene symposium, and it was for a VR artwork created by Thomas Saraceno for the In Orbit exhibition at K21 in Düsseldorf. And my big kind of point or like interest was how we could approach this digital dualism, which comes up sometimes in these virtual experiences, being that the digital isn't the same as the real, which often is true, but that they also have a different value within our experiences. So sometimes there is that ability to kind of wipe away a digital experience as just being digital, only digital, again with your commas around that word.
Yeah, this is a very interesting point. And for me, to question technology is not at the core of my work. I'm really would think of myself, I would love to think of myself more as someone who is post-internet or post-digital, in the sense that I'm incorporating all these technologies more than that I'm asking or questioning them. For me, the hyper-reality that is created through digital technologies is already a reality we are living it, that is not separated from the real world that we found in the physical space. Because the knowledge about these plans, the knowledge about climate change, the knowledge about, I don't know, our ability to get a bank loan, all these kind of knowledges are based on hyper-realities created by digital tools. And so I think, and you can also reference the Jean Baudrillard and the simulation and the simulacra. It's about this, that these encounters or these experiences in the digital world are relocating the real. So they are not like only a digital thing that can be forgotten afterwards. No, they, through experiencing a digital peatland, this will relocate the real peatland. Once you made this experience, you will never see the peatland again through the same eyes. And this is only on a small scale in my work. But if you think this in a bigger scale as a kind of so I'm only one artist doing this, but if you think of this in a bigger scale, you will see that it can change a lot about also our perception of the real.
Yeah, I definitely feel, especially also with Corona, as a lot of things became digital due to the lockdown, and a lot of relationships were also strengthened digitally as people were separated. I feel like this conversation about digital dualism has also started to, I don't want to say change, but it's definitely transforming, because hybrid now is also even more ingrained on a day-to-day level. You mentioned the internet and these ways of creating information and sharing experiences, but it's really, it's very tactile for me somehow, like very haptic. And I felt that also in this VR artwork, like that we were literally bending our knees to look under the soil line, that we were transforming our physicality, like our corporal physicality in that very moment in relation to something that was digital, which I find absolutely amazing. And
beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah, the VR goggles are really something that I think even in a conversation with you, you mentioned that 60 to 70% of the experience is the technology.
Yes, I think this is because, let's say the medium is not really new, but it's for the most of the people. For us, it's new, right? It's a new thing that we encounter over the last 5 to 10 years. And it's being used more and more in games industry, in museums and so on and so on. But because for the most of us, it's the first or the second or maybe the third experience, the medium itself is overlapping the art that I create in the medium, or that it will be present in the medium. And so the first thing that as an artist working with VR is always to say to yourself, okay, there's a very big chunk of what people would experience that you can hardly tame. It's like coming from this big company's production side, with all the things that they put on it. And then maybe you have this little opportunity to get through with a kind of an idea you had for this medium or for this digital surrounding. And what is interesting, seeing the responses from the audiences towards my work, is that a lot of people really liked this kind of minimalism, even though there are a lot of plans and they are highly detailed, and it's really not a minimalistic environment. People always tend to think of this as a minimalist thing because you are not allowed, as you said, to interact so much. This is the promise of the technology that we always think of, that you can use a controller to cut something, to shoot something, and so on and so on. But what we are doing here is Or what I'm trying to is to invert also this idea of interaction and to invert the idea of our ability to envision a better future that we as innovators or as conquerors could change or have to change to create a better place. And because I think this is true, mostly for the human sphere, this is also something we should challenge ourselves totally. But on the other hand, we should also see that our efforts in innovating and in conquering the future, it's always like also affecting the non-human world in a more not so good way, actually. And this is what we should be aware of. And I think this medium has the ability, if you invert it a bit, or if you reverse the ideas a bit that comes with the technology, with the promises of the technology, that you can experience this also a bit, to become slow, to become quiet, to get stuck in a kind of a dense environment that is not yours, maybe.
Yeah, it really brings back an episode with Samuel Hertz, a sound designer and environmental researcher on the program, who was talking about complexity theory and this idea also of taking a back seat. Like, what is it also to observe and realize that maybe the human species is not the species to jump in again, and take the leadership, but actually take a moment to see what else presents itself. I want to move now around the exhibition because we've spent a lot of time on Blooming Love, and you actually had a solo exhibition, so there were a few artworks there, and there was one based on artistic movement and tropic movement, which has a very beautiful German title, but I'll let you pronounce that. And within this artwork, you were posing the question of whether we are willing to empathize with non-human living forms and grant them an autonomous intrinsic value, which I think really just kind of puts the point on exactly what we're talking about now. Like, what is this really autonomous value that the plant life is giving?
Yeah, this is the very question that is like driving me throughout the last 4 or 5 years. And yeah, the work is called in German Nastien and Tropismen, which, as you said, is like 2 different types of movement of plants. I was interested in how movement of plants can be a potential to empathize. I was interested in how movement of plants can be a potential for empathy towards plants. How can we, through this movement, maybe also encounter ourselves in these plants? And not by equalizing plants and humans, but by making the difference more and more visible. So what you see in the artwork is a kind of a simulation that is in real time. So it's not a movie that is being played or in video. It's an algorithm that is fueled by these 3D objects that I made from 7 different plant species from the Peatlands. And they have different algorithms to do a certain movement that they would do also in real life. So these, I call them plant avatars, are representing these plants and their movements. And in the installation, they can do them in high speed, actually. So the movement that would normally or realistically could not be have seen through the human eye or through the human gaze is now like in a time lapse being speed up. And this speed is not linear, so it's always sometimes also very slow again, then it becomes more speed up. So there's a kind of an always ongoing change in this environment. And there in the installation, you can find 3 different screens on which these plants appear. But most of the time, only one plant or one screen is active. And so you are becoming a kind of an object for these plans. So this is, again, like I said before, I'm interested in this inverting of interactivity. Who is moving whom? This is something that I wanted to put in the middle of this installation. And so if you are entering the installation, you are not the one by moving your hands and the tracking of a 3D camera that is moving the plans, as you find these installations very often in museums and in galleries. But the thing is vice versa. The plans are moving you through the exhibition space. And thereby you are invited to move yourself with these plans. Then there are also different objects that invite you to move even more and in a specific way. So there's this moment where this installation becomes also a kind of a performative moment, let's say, where you are performing with these plans, maybe, let's say, also dancing with these plans, you could say. And I think there's a kind of a quality of a new potential for emotion or for relation in that I'm really interested in to find that out or to research where that lies. When does that start? How intense can it be? So these are things that are like I'm interested in. And therefore I'm using these simulated environments that are also growing in real time.
Yeah, for me it is such a strong example also of a worlding practice of shaping and being shaped by our surroundings, because I spend a lot of time in this room with my partner's mum, and I also noticed when we entered her initial waving her arms or thinking if there were sensors. You mentioned the 3 screens which were in different parts of the room, but there was also a light installation, and this relation between the light and the plant avatars on the screen was very strong, and it took a moment, I think, to calm down, to take a back seat, as Samuel Hertz said, and just begin to observe also this relation between the light and the screens. And definitely I was being led by the screens. So once a screen came to life and the image of the plant was on the screen, I would move towards it. And it was only maybe the 3rd round that I was like, oh, the screens are moving me, you know? And then I think it takes also one step further to be like, oh no, the plants are moving me. It's actually what the screens are representing, again, to kind of break down the technology of light and electricity and input, which often also pulls us towards it, but really also to understand what the screens are representing and revealing to us. So it was something that also, in trying to figure it out, slowed me down. And I think that's exactly the politic of the work, of really taking the time and working through very consciously the levels of one, waving arms to see if it's you, to, noticing the electricity moving and that it's drawing you because it's colorful and exciting, to actually what those pixels are revealing, and another level of meaning making that's presenting itself. So I think it's, a very powerful work in that way, and something that does require time, which is interesting because when you go in, you're moving through an exhibition and you can continue. So I think it's something, for people also to be conscious when they're entering into these spaces of what the work is asking for also, like what is this invitation in relation to time and attention right now.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Renae. This is so well said. And I'm really I'm super happy that you have this kind of very observing eye that is so specific.
But thank you also for the work, because I think worlding often is very subtle. you know? And I think during Corona or these moments of less input, a lot of people came to these conversations like very willingly. Like there was a real desire for being in nature, being in contact, understanding, observing from being in an apartment. But then as things started to speed up, I think a lot of older habits came. And then, of course, you know, there are continual crises in different parts of the world. So it's, it's really this artistic perspective, or from many different fields, also scientific perspectives that are really requiring that we stay with it, you know, stay with the trouble, as Donna Haraway would say. As part of this podcast, I'm inviting guests to share a proposition, a physical proposition that listeners and myself can embody your research. And I'm really curious about developing relations with non-human subjects. And perhaps you could share a proposition for this that we can experience with you now.
Yes, I'm very glad that you invited me also to do this part, or to think about it. I was working in theater and in performance art for a very long time as a media artist, but then I turned a little bit away and I was more concentrated on these screens and all these kind of technology. But I'm still very interested in, and as you said, also the body is a part of the installation I make there, right? So the body is always thought of. So it's not that it's excluded, like in a computer game or something, or most of the computer games. I'm trying something here now, and I'm very interested how that works. So I will, it's like maybe like 3 minutes, 5 minutes. And whenever you want, you can make a pause and you can take your time in between. And also, let yourself go, let yourself flow with these kind of things. And I will start now. So at first, I'd like to ask you to take your smartphone and to enter your photo gallery. If you are in your photo gallery, then open the folder with your camera roll, meaning the photos you took yourself. If you are there, then please search for the most recent image that you took that depicts a plant. So if it's not obvious and easy to find, then take your time and look carefully through the previews of the images. Where is a plant? Where might be a plant? This plant didn't have to be in the center of the image. It could be also in a corner or behind the main subject of the picture. It could be at the edge of the image. It could be cropped by the camera. Doesn't matter. Just search for, is there a leaf, a trunk, a branch, or even the whole plant? So once you find that image, open the image, show the whole image full screen on your screen, and look at the image for a moment. Remember the situation you took that photo. Where did you came from and where did you went? And who was with you maybe in that moment? Think about yourself, how you were standing in that situation, how you were moving there, how you were like holding your arms to take this photo. So think about your body, look to your body from the outside now, and think about the relation of your body to that scene in this minute, in this very second that you took the image. Ask yourself, what was the relation between you and the plant in that moment? Is there one? Now zoom into the image as much as possible towards the plant and try to make the plant the main content of your screen. Now look at this plant. Do you know what kind of plant is this? Do you know the name of the species maybe? Did this plant grow up where it is standing on your image? Or was it brought there by someone or something? And maybe you can also know how old is this plant? And can you estimate if this plant is injured? Or is it healthy? Will it survive? Try to imagine now what movement this plant is maybe doing while growing. Make an assumption. For example, do the leaves unfurl? Or do the tips of the blossom or the stalks twist as they stretch towards the sun? Create in your inner eye a time lapse of that plant growing. And loop this movement over and over again. While looping, adjust the movement little by little so that it becomes more and more realistic. Now let this loop inform your body. Let the movement grow inside of your body. And if you feel like, start to move. Let the plant trigger your movement. Move with this plant. That's it.
I have to come back to the microphone. I moved away. I grew away. My photo was of a plant that's no longer with me. It was a plant I spent some time with at a residency, which I've now travelled back to my home and left the plant behind. So it's very interesting also to kind of also engage the memory in this task with a past photo. Like a dedication to a plant you shared time with.
It's not so really centering around this peatland idea that I was working in the last 3 years, but it's like one of the core questions, which was plant blindness as a kind of inability of humans to see plant life and to see the value and the intrinsic value of plant life. That is not only bound to our needs and to what we as humans need from plants and with plants, but that plants have also an own life and own agenda and needs. They have a social life and so on and so on. And I think this is also, I trained myself also to look at these plants and to follow their lives, these plants that surround me, and thereby looking for potentials for emotions or for relations.
Yeah, so I hope that listeners will continue this practice as they journey through their life and grow in different ways.
This would be super nice, yes.
And finally, before we end this episode, I would be curious who you're going to pass on the mic to continue the 11th string figure.
Yes, thank you, Renae. This is a very amazing also proposition and opportunity for me. And I would love to propose my dear friend and dance artist from Latvia, Agnese Borchukova.
Great. I'm looking forward to that conversation and going to the heart of the Peatlands, to Latvia. Thank you so much for contributing to the Welding project, and all the best with your work. I'm looking forward to following and attending your next exhibition.
Thank you so much, Renae, for this very nice talk and your loving and open heart and eyes.
Have a great day.
You too.
Thank you for listening to the Welding Podcast. Gefördert durch die Beauftragte der Bundesregierung für Kultur und Medien im Programm Neustart Kultur. Hilfsprogramm des Tanzen des Dachverband Tanz Deutschland.